What's up everyone, Subterranean here, and today we're going to learn how to make this synth pad. This synth pad has a very vintage feel, and it almost has a little bit of an acoustic string sound to it. Synth pads similar to these have been used in countless drum and bass and jungle songs from the 90s and even today. And even in songs with a more recent feel to them, vintage and lo-fi sounds like these can really add some unique grit to the songs. So we'll start off by initializing the patch in Dune 2. And we'll get rid of these external effects for now. And let's start with our second oscillator. We'll actually be leaving the first oscillator on the default sawtooth. Let's change the density to 1. We'll turn it up all the way in our oscillator mixer. We'll set the synthesis type to be wavetable. And we'll set that wavetable to be chords. Now let's cycle through the position and see if we find a waveform we like. I think I like it on 7. We'll leave it on there. And now we'll tweak with the pitch semitones, and we'll see if we get a nice sound. Plus 24 will work. And now we'll set the fine pitch to minus 61. Some people might think of this as a very minor step to the sound, but I actually find this essential to giving this synth pad a more organic and old school sound. Now we'll go to our third oscillator. We'll leave that on a sawtooth. We'll set it to be about 80% in the oscillator mixer. And now we'll tweak with the semitones on this sound. I think it sounds good on plus 12. And now we'll tweak with the fine pitch on the third oscillator. 41 should work. Now we're going to go to our filter. We'll leave it on the default LFO pass 2 poles. And now we'll tweak with the cutoff. I like it on 77%. And we'll leave the rest of the controls for the filter on the default. Now let's head over to our amplitude envelope. And because this is a synth pad, we want high attack levels and even higher release levels. So let's play with the attack knob. About 35% will do, not too much. And now we'll do the same thing with the release knob. We'll put it on 74%. That seems to work pretty well. Now we'll go to the LFO tab. We'll set the LFO to be sync. We'll set the rate to something pretty slow, like maybe 2/1. And we'll leave the shape on sine wave and leave everything else as default. Now let's go into our mod matrix. We'll set the source for 1 and 2 to be LFO 1. And we'll set the destination of number 1 to be the filter cutoff. Now let's tweak the amount and see if we get a sound we like. I think plus 6 works well, something nice and subtle. Now we'll set the destination of number 2 to be the pitch fine. And once again, we'll tweak with the amount on this. I think we'll put it at plus 4. That sounds pretty good. Modulating the cutoff with LFO for synth pads like these is a very essential part of the sound because it gives it somewhat of an evolving feel and it doesn't stay consistent and get boring. And I also like slightly modulating the pitch with the LFO because it gives it more of a human sound. Now let's head over to our effects bus 1. And our first effect is going to be a chorus. We'll turn that on by clicking the active button. We'll set the mode to be dual. And let's play with the depth and see if we get a good sound. 40% will work well. And now we'll do the same thing with the dry wet. $75 should be fine. Now we'll go to our reverb. We'll activate that. We'll set the type to be ambience, which has a very classic sound to it. And now let's play with the time. 1.9 will work well. We'll set the low cut to be about 34%. And now we'll tweak with the dry wet. I actually like it all the way at 100%. And one last change before we move on to the external effects. Let's go to our Unison Voices and increase the amount to 4. Set the spread all the way to 100% so we get a nice stereo effect. And now we'll tweak with the detune knob. 38% will work well. When you're making sounds that are supposed to have a very old school and classic feel to them, you might not want to go too crazy on making super detuned sounds, as a lot of physical synthesizers in the 90s didn't have the power to make crazy modulated supersolids like we can do now with VSTs. Now we'll close Dune 2, and let's move on to the external effects. The first effect we're going to add is going to be erosion, to add some more classic grit to the sound. Let's turn up the amount to about 15. Just type that in. And now let's play with the frequency and see if we get a sound we like. About 9.80 kilohertz will work well. Now we'll add on an EQ8. We'll set our first band to be a low cut times 4. And let's cut out those unnecessary low frequencies. About 200 hertz will work. Now let's take our fourth band, which is a high shelf. Let's put this somewhere around maybe 6.35 kilohertz. And now we'll increase the gain. 3.10 decibels works well. And for our last effect, we're going to go to our MIDI effects, and we'll be putting on a chord. We'll put that on before anything else, even before Dune 2. And this is essential to getting that old school 90s feel. We'll take our first pitch shift and set it up to +7 semitones. Our second one will be at +10. And our last one will be at -9. And there we have our sound. Nice. You might want to change the chord progression depending on what type of song you're making. But I like these settings for classic jungle and drum and bass tracks. And before I end this video, I'd like to share one little tip that might be helpful when making these types of songs. Back in the 90s, a lot of jungle and drum and bass producers used samplers very heavily for their music. A lot of them would take synth pads that they already made and import them into samplers, or they might even take samples from other songs with good synth pads and load them into the sampler to play with. We're going to recreate that type of sound by going to our instruments and loading up a sampler. And now we'll delete the chord progression we already have. We'll create a new one, and we're just going to hold down a C note. That works. Now we're going to bounce that down into audio form, and we'll import that into the sampler. And now we'll right click again and click flatten. Now we'll click on our sampler, drag this into the sampler, and now we have our pad bounced down into an audio file. You can hear that lo-fi gritty effect coming through really well when you play it on low notes. And while you're at it, you might want to add some reverb onto the sampler, because it's a little bit dry when you're just playing notes and you can't hear the reverb of the synth too well. Try that. And there we go, a classic 90s synth pad. So that was my tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like this video and leave a comment, as it really helps us out. And please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.